Hey, Bryan.
Hey, good afternoon.
Great to have you here. Congratulations on the book, which you all will see outside later, and Bryan will happily meet you and sign a copy for you. Bryan, I really related to this because now I'm at From Day One, and I can call myself chief something, chief of content. All right, but it's a small company. Back when I spent a career at Time Warner, giant company. You might have some executive term in your name, but there's always people above you and people below you, and that whole thing of being caught in the middle and trying to look independent and not just passing things along, it's a rough thing. So I guess my first question to you about the book is how did middle manager get to be kind of a pejorative term? I mean, what's the caricature that kind of is plastered on that role?
I don't think All right, there we go. I think middle managers, we think of them as bureaucrats. We think of, in particular, if you think about, some of the things starting in the mid to late 90s, Dilbert or Office Space. Middle managers are the folks making sure you have the proper cover sheet for your TPS report. The folks doing administrative work for the sake of administrative work, meetings for the sake of meetings, and the folks that if you got one more email drop by from them, you would not say, oh my gosh, thank you, you're here, but you'd have a kind of a roll of the eyes. And while there may be a grain of truth in a little bit of that, I think what we see is that, in particular in today's organizations, middle managers are more the victims of bureaucracy than the perpetuators of it. If you ask middle managers what they want less of, it's less meetings and less administrative work. They're not saying, gosh, if I could only pack in one more meeting today, that's what I want. I mean, they're looking to, motivate their teams to be there. So the question is, how do we flip everybody's mindset from managers being the ones who are the bureaucrats to managers who are the ones that want to help teams succeed and want to help align people with the mission and help people achieve the broader goals we do together. And so that's, attacking that misperception is part of why we wrote the book.
Well, what was your epiphany or aha moment that led you to want to write the book? Were you once on the other side? Did you once advocate cutting middle managers or cutting costs? Have you always been a believer, or did you have that?
I think we've always believed that managers were important. And I think what we saw, though, during COVID in particular. So one of my co-authors, Bill Schaninger, and I have a podcast, McKinsey Talks Talent. We had an episode on the vanishing middle manager. That was in the middle of COVID. And what we recognized in that podcast, it was a little bit of the origin story for the book, was managers were needed to spend even more time with their teams, needed to spend more time because you were connecting remotely. So that's not just a swing by, that's a scheduled Zoom catch up. So there were all of these additional pressures that managers were having, but they didn't have time to do it. And we recognize, there's one piece of research that was done in the height of the pandemic by a mental health organization that surveyed people, said, how many of you have been checked in on? Just how are you doing? 40% of respondents said no one had checked in on them. Not a manager, not HR, not a coworker. And those people were 40% more likely to be showing some signs of distress. So we recognize managers are being asked to do more in the people leadership side of COVID, and it mattered a ton that they did it. And so we started thinking, well, how do we empower managers to have more time to do the kinds of things that we know the organizations need them to do and we know their people need to do?
Now, could you give us some historical context of how, over time, over decades, did middle management get dissed? To use a crude term, but how did they? Was there a lack of investment? Were they always during various recessions, the ones who got trimmed? What was that process to where we are?
I think if you can go back to the early 90s, if not a little bit before. And there's actually a McKinsey article you can download from 1992 that's the organization of the 90s that talks about a leaner organization where with new communication technologies, now you can communicate more directly to the front line and in some ways, speed up organizations and make it faster. And so I think there was a vein of, hey, if we can directly communicate with the front line, shouldn't we do that? And if we do that, don't we need less people kind of communicating direction? and make it a simpler organization. And part of that is true, but you still need the coaching elements that go behind it. If you turn to the Great Recession, you still continue to have organizations now investing in new technologies that indirectly impacted managers. So if you think of employee self-serve or manager self-serve, well, often that self-serve put the administrative work back on the manager because it wasn't perfect. They still had to clean the data. They still had to figure out so it was an imperfect substitute. So managers started getting more and more administrative work and were being valued less and less for the people side. And I think we started to see the tide shift even a little bit before COVID in 2015 on, starting in tech, but also in other organizations where you were seeing middle managers being asked to coordinate with contractors outside of the organization, coordinate broader team. And they were recognizing, hey, wait, this management thing is not as simple as me giving orders to people directly 2 levels below me. There's actually a lot of coordination that needs to go on. And who's going to lead that coordination? Well, it's these managers. So you started to see a little bit of that emerge 5-10 years ago. But I think we've now really seen the acceleration. While managers have always been important, really the current context and acceleration and a recognition of what managers can uniquely do.
So the contingent workforce, or the growth of that, has really piled a lot of administrative work on managers, essentially.
It's administrative work, but it's also managerial work, because now you've got new team members. They just don't happen to work for you.
Yeah.
They happen to work for a contractor or a set of contractors, or you're navigating an ecosystem that you have to be the day-to-day leader, providing purpose and direction, coaching, leadership. That's not just folks that you have direct, that are your direct reports, but they're a broader set of people that you have to mobilize for action. And then that shift is required. Well, who's the person doing the mobilizing? Well, it's the manager.
Mm-hmm. How does the career path of the middle manager kind of undermine their ability to do their jobs? I mean, from going from being a contributor or a creative person to being a leader and then getting promoted outside their comfort zone. This is notorious from the world of journalism. Reporters are great, and then they get put in editorial roles and they don't know a thing about managing. I'm sure it happens in other industries.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we see, one of the pitfalls, is you take a great individual contributor who's great in their role and you're worried about losing him, or you're worried about losing her. Because she's really great at what she does and she's required, but in order to give that person more pay and to progress in their career, because she's asking for it or he's asking for a promotion, a pay raise, some sense of movement, what we do is we promote them. And the only place to promote them is into management. And now they've got a team. And they may or may not be natural team leaders. We're selecting them because of what they did great as an individual contributor. In the book, we contrast that pitfall with what Waffle House does. I don't know how many of you all have been to a Waffle House. I spent about 25 years in Atlanta, and so I've been in my share of Waffle Houses. But the core of the operation at a Waffle House is the short order cook. And they have 3 levels of short order cook at Waffle House: grill operator, master grill operator, and rock star on the grill, colloquially known as Elvis on the grill. And what that Elvis on the grill is able to cook $5,000 worth of food in a single shift, which at a $2 waffle that's a lot of food, right? What they recognized is we need to keep rock stars on the grill. We don't need to say, you know what, you are so good at what you do, stop that and start making the schedule. Stop that, and we've got to now manage, the bacon's not coming in at the right time. They're not doing that. They're saying, you're really good at this thing that's central to our operation, and we're going to make it so that you can progress in your career, progress in pay, and actually in some cases make more than an assistant manager would make by being a rock star on the grill. And so the question I have, across the organizations that I work with is, what's the equivalent for you? That is that critical individual contributor role where you want to create a track of increased pay and responsibility for them, but you don't need to have them be a manager. Create a great track. And on the flip side, if we're now selecting for managers who'll be great managers, let's actually select for it. Let's define what it is. Let's look at what the characteristics are, and let's really, try to select people into management who will be great at managing and leading.
Mm-hmm. Could they, just on the Elvis on the grill idea for a moment, could that Elvis on the grill be put in charge of teaching others to be Elvis on the grill, or is that just counterproductive? I mean, is that
I mean, they could. I mean, you could think about it as part of the responsibilities is they could absolutely, think about some of the trainers, some of the aspects of, hey, here are the tips of the trade because they're very good at what they do. But you mainly want them processing $5,000 worth of order in the shoe.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the main thing that they're doing. They're an individual contributor and truly great at it. They don't have to be solely that's what they do, but that's where the focus is.
Mm-hmm. Well, now we know that middle managers now are consuming vast amounts of time filling out forms or doing all kinds of things that are not really about managing people. But in your book, you have these several chapters about what they could be doing that would empower them, make their jobs richer, help the people they supervise, including like rebundling jobs when there's times of transformation, connecting the work to the people, and working more closely actually with HR. Could you give us a couple of examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we found through our research is the middle managers on average spend half of their time on either individual contributor work or administrative work. And that is squeezing out their ability to do some of the more strategic work, thinking through the talent on their team, thinking through the overall goals, the coaching. It's getting squeezed out. So what we're seeing some organizations do is be very thoughtful of how do I reduce the administrative burden? How do I think through what I can do to make the individual contributor work, if it's required, easier? And then to free up on the other side, I mean, what we're seeing is managers are critical in reimagining what the work of the future looks like. If you think about some of the evolution of new technologies as they come through, hey, we're going to need people to mentor and guide the technologies. We're going to need to have people that can figure out what the roles of the future look like. We need people that are more involved in talent acquisition for some of the harder roles where it's not the manager calling HR and said, hey, I got an idea, I need somebody. Hey, they're a partner in defining the role, growing. All of those aspects of what good managers are take time and take skill. And what we argue in the book is if you create the time for them to do it, they can really be a key partner and in fact a key leader in shaping what the workforce looks like and what the work looks like in the future.
You have a great example in the beginning of the book about, it's like a tale of two companies, and in one company, the CEO was micromanaging everything and making rule by fiat, and in another one was a CEO and she really listened, and she found that with back to work policy that each manager had kind of the team needs were different. So that CEO had to, it seemed like all about trust, like, okay, I'm going to delegate this to you managers and empower you to decide. That seems like a great, kind of microcosm of the trust factor from the top to the middle manager.
I mean, absolutely. I think a key part of this is how do we think through from the leadership standpoint, what do we want to empower our managers to do? If we have a return to work policy, how do we make that come to life in a way that makes sense to everybody involved and the person who's responsible for having it make sense to the folks on their team is the manager. And so, how do you empower the manager in that example, to work with the team to say, hey, here's what makes sense for us. Because the thing that's demoralizing for the manager and for their team is to say, well, we have a mandate and everybody has to be here Tuesday. Except Tuesday happens to be the day that it doesn't make sense in this location because there's another event going on or because half of the other people are attending this meet. Managers need to have some degree of discretion because they understand what's going on with the work, what's going on with the context, what's going on in everybody's individual life. And so, empowering the manager to, hey, we have a goal of this kind of purposeful presence, but having managers be the ones to guide it versus managers just saying, I don't know, boss said we have to be here Tuesday. That makes no sense. I know it makes no sense. That's where you get the downward spiral of managers where they feel like, I know this doesn't make sense, but I'm being forced to tell you this anyway. How do you flip it so that you're not putting your managers in a position where they ever have to say, I know this doesn't make sense, but. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then on the flip side, sometimes what we see, managers try to do is do the right thing on a people standpoint. We have one story in the book of a manager who has somebody that's just not a fit for the role on their team. Just not a fit. Doesn't work. And that manager invests with that colleague for over a year. Counsels them, works with them, provides clear feedback. The problem with the manager never told HR. So come review time, it's time to counsel this person to find another opportunity. And the person agrees, and it's kind of, this feels like this has been done with dignity, whatever. And HR comes and says, we can't do that. We don't have a PIP. Well, what do you mean a PIP? What's that? Manager didn't know, right? And so now we've got another 6 months of going through whatever. Hey, wouldn't it be great if when the manager had more time to think through people, that HR also had more time to pair with the manager to say, hey, when you're doing something, let's check in. How's your team going? What's happening? And so that HR becomes more of that continuous coach to a manager versus the cop at the end that is like, I don't have the paperwork for this. I mean, the paperwork's important. I mean, that's critical too, but how do you flip the time of both the manager and their coach in HR so that you can have more of those productive conversations together?
In the book, you mentioned that the, quote, the pendulum has swung in favor of the worker. Now, that definitely happened during the pandemic and the Great Resignation, but now it feels like it's swinging back a little bit. Retention rates are higher. But you're saying that the employers need to embrace a new meaning of loyalty because, in fact, the worker retains more power than they had 5 years ago. So what questions should companies ask themselves about this new loyalty concept of?
Well, I think organizations should ask themselves, hey, what's the core value proposition that we have, and how do we develop this relationship over a longer period of time? There will always be, across economic cycles, ebbs and flows of, well, does the worker have more power, or does the company have more power? But going forward, we're going to be short of talent in a number of areas. Short in healthcare, short in construction, short in manufacturing. We're going to be short in some of the technical skills that we may be needed to have the Gen AI transition. So if you look across the economy, even though maybe in uncertain times and voluntary quit rates may be down, there's still a lot of people that a nurse could quit a job at CHOP tomorrow and find 10 jobs by the end of the week, right? And that's the reality we live in. So, and if you look at the demographic trends, if you look at the skill trends going forward for huge sections of our workforce, that's going to be key. So I think the question becomes not, hey, can I force somebody to do something in this moment right now? But longer term, people do have options and continue to have options, and we're still net short of talent. So how do we think through the value proposition, think through the relationships that we have so that, if you're the employer of that nurse, they feel connected to you in a way that goes beyond the shift or the paycheck.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wanted to ask you, you are in a leadership position in your firm, but it's a giant firm, and so you must have some bosses, and how do you navigate that? Because
I'm 100% a middle manager. Like in the client service context, I'm a leader. I lead my client service teams. I'm able to aggregate pieces within. I've led the work we do in talent globally for McKinsey for a while. So I lead that team. But talent sits within our people and organization practice, which sits within our functional capability areas within the firm, which reports to the acceleration team that then reports to our managing director.
You need a map that says...
So I'm here at one level, I can motivate my team to go after opportunities, be incredibly entrepreneurial, but at another level, I have budgets. I've got hey, we're not doing this training this year. Or, we've got this new policy or these other pieces. I've got about 30 different partner self-service, 30 different self-serve things that help me manage all the parts of it. And so I feel it too. And part of what's interesting is we're having those conversations with our firm to say, hey, how do we simplify what we do? Because you probably don't want me, you don't realize this, but you probably don't want me doing all of these administrative things, that when the person who owns and finance that small thing that I'm working on is like, oh, that'll only take 5 minutes. It takes 15, and you're not the only one, right? And so creating that what we're working on is creating the holistic perspective. If I'm a middle manager, which for some of the firm functions I am, what's my day in the life look like? What's my week in the life look like? And how could you design all of those things around me? One of the clients that we're working with now has this idea of a concierge bot. hey, can we use Gen AI and some of the emerging technologies just to make life easier for managers? Just think through all of the things that they have to do, whether it's tracking down when this report fell off from this report, these other pieces, but look at it not from a system by system, but from a holistic manager perspective with the view that, gosh, isn't that how we unlock it? So I feel that I would love that at McKinsey. I know we're working towards it. But that's a little bit of how I feel as a middle manager and the kind of feedback I'm providing to our firm.
People might like that. I met an HR person in Seattle who was, a self-starter, early adopter of generative AI, and she was talking about, I use it to plan my garden, and I've used it to plan a party, and you could see how it work and home could blur, but you could be using that tool in both. Much of the people management conversation in the last few years has shifted, it seems like, from talking about flexibility and empathy to more like performance and productivity. And you take that on. In one of your chapters, you talk about melding performance with purpose. Could you tell us how those can kind of fit together to be synergistic or productive in some way?
Yeah, I mean, that chapter pulls on some of the research that we've done across organizations where we found that there are a set of organizations that were broadly, people-centric organizations that were known for their investments in training, known for their collaborative cultures, known for being good in people. A subset of those organizations outperformed financially, and a subset did not. The subset that outperformed financially were more resilient than those outperformers who weren't invested in people. So we know that people and performance mixed together is special, because it gives you the financial performance that being just people alone doesn't give you, and it gives you the resiliency that just being performance alone doesn't give you. You have lower turnover, you've got better retention. And so what we try to highlight is, how do you meld that people and performance together? And it comes down to doing a few things well. One is, as a manager, providing role clarity and connection to why are we doing this? Connection to the broader purpose. So purpose and meaning in the work, and clarity is who gets it done. And then it's managers who are empowering. No one likes a micromanager, but also challenging, having the tough conversations at the right amount of time. And we found that organizations that had role clarity and had managers who were skilled at not micromanaging, but having tough conversations and had good performance rhythms, those are the ones that outperform. But it's a skill. A lot of people want to duck the hard conversation. It's just not comfortable, right? And it's, how do we upskill our managers, give them the space, and the expectation to have those tough conversations on a more ongoing basis.
Yeah, that is an underappreciated talent, and I think a lot of managers would appreciate more coaching on that, how to give feedback. Now, I of course have a statutory or fiduciary obligation to ask you at least one question about AI. So how is it going to affect the role of the middle manager in some way that they may not expect?
I think AI can help middle managers free up time, take some of that administrative burden off, and can also make it easier for them to access information that in their individual contributor role, often our managers are experts, helping them get that access to that expert information faster, so it'll free up time. At the same time, managers are going to be after managing not just people, but algorithms. And that has a few implications. One, managers have to spend more time to make sure that those are correct, working with the tech teams, working with the other teams. It also means that if you are a manager of a team today that has 10 people, and some of the new technologies can make it so that the work can be done with 4 people, how are you going to create the pipeline for you? So if you're a 6-year associate at a law firm and you rely on the 1st and 2nd year associates to create drafts for you, and AI can do it, that's great as a 6-year associate. You're a lot more productive. And you might have a few associates underneath you. But who's going to train the next 6-year associate? Right? You used to train by the work that you did. Now that's going to be different. And so managers need to carve out time to think through deliberately, okay, how am I apprenticing and developing the next generation?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Bryan. I found the book really enlightening, and I could see myself in lots of mistakes I made in the old days. It's called Power to the Middle, and Bryan will be available to autograph copies right now. And now it's time for another coffee break. Thank you.
Thank you.